Okay, that marks the start of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off here. Like always, I just want to thank everyone for joining in, for taking the time out of your day to learn a little bit more about Knowify. We put a lot of work into making Knowify and supporting everyone using it. So when we see that so many of you guys are uh, taking time out of your day to just learn a little bit more, see if you can use the software in a little bit more detail, get as much as you can out of it. It really means a lot to us. So thanks first and foremost just for joining in. Today's webinar topic is on tracking vendor costs. So we're going to be covering a bunch of different parts of Knowify, mainly around purchases and bills. But this is the idea of tracking costs that are more classic transactional costs. So there's a lot of different ways to track costs in Knowify. We also have things like time tracking, allocations, which we will touch on a bit today. But this is going to be the more simple. I bought something for a job. How much did that cost me? And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Terrin. I've been working at Knowify for uh, just about 10 years now. And my job at Knowify is really just to make sure that you guys are all happy with the software, happy with the experience that you have with Knowify in general. So I work a lot with our customer facing teams as well as our product team and just about a little bit of everything here at Knowify. And just a quick little overview of what we'll be covering here today. I always start with slides, and we'll be discussing uh, what we mean when we talk about these different types of vendor costs and what type of categories of cost we track in Knowify. Um, I'll also be covering how we get into these different types of categories. What do these categories mean? And then how do we make Knowify track our costs the way that we want to see them? And then I'll also pull up my Knowify account, go through a demonstration so you can see all of this happen inside a real Knowify account. And we always finish with some Q&A. If you have questions during the webinar, you can always submit them in Zoom's Q&A. I have my associate Vin who answers a lot of the questions in real time, but the longer form ones that are easier answered with a demonstration, I will be answering those uh, at the end with the demo. Sorry, it looked like my mic had stopped for a second, so I just wanted to make sure that that's still running smoothly. Well, with all that being said, I'll go ahead and kick us off here. And again, we'll start by talking about defining cost. So what are we talking about when we refer to cost in Knowify? Now, our last webinar was on budgeting, which is when we're discussing more projecting costs, not anything actually that happened, but a way for us to plan out how much we will be spending. Now, this webinar is the way that we actually track that cost. How much did we actually end up spending as opposed to what we initially budgeted when we set up the job? Um, I always like to simplify it as money going out. How much have we spent on the job? How much did I take from my money and give to other parties? And in this case, it's mostly going to be vendors. Um, And so what we like to do is use those budgets from our last webinar and see how close we get on that by tracking all of these actual costs. So if I said that materials are going to cost me $6,700, like in this screenshot we have in the slide, I want to know, did I actually spend 6,700 or did I spend less? And that's where our tracking of vendor costs really comes into play. We expected 6,700, we spent 6,100. This gives us more information. So if I have a similar job in the future, I could say, oh, it's actually going to be a lower budget, which means I can quote a lower price, and I can use that lower price to potentially win more jobs. And again, this doesn't really factor in, this webinar won't factor in labor costs because our payroll cost isn't necessarily a vendor cost. We're paying individual employees that are employed by us. So it's less transactional in that way. But our next webinar will, I believe, be on labor costing. So we'll be able to do a deeper dive on that next time. Um, What's also nice about tracking cost in a job is it helps us understand how far along we are on this project at any point in time. So I can use my cost versus budget to say I've spent half of my budget, so I'm roughly halfway done with my job. And that's not always the best metric to use for how far along you are in a project, but from a purely construction accounting standpoint, there is some power to seeing, okay, how much have we spent? How much does that suggest that we have completed in the job at any point in time? It helps with things like WIP reporting as well. And when we track our costs on a job, we do our best to track job-specific costs. So things like office manager time that is spread across multiple jobs all throughout the day, maybe not the best thing. Things like our office rent, supplies, things like that aren't necessarily needed to be tracked as job costs. We really want to focus specifically on costs that are applied to the job that we bought them for, that we spent the money for. So we can break down our costs into different categories in Knowify. The most basic one would be materials, and this has been the oldest category in Knowify, and it's really just as simple as what's something that I purchased and used on this job. Now, when I say purchased and used, I mean we bought it for this job, we used it on that job, we never brought it home. Because there might be something that we buy that's a piece of equipment, and we'll get to that in a moment, but we might buy a piece of equipment that we use on a job, but then we still own that equipment. So the job costing of that wouldn't be exactly the same as materials, which would be something like lumber or paint or wire or something that's actually purchased and used, burned on the job essentially. And then again, we're not going to be returning home with it. Then we can get into labor. And for labor, we are mainly doing this based off of time spent on the job. So in Knowify, we set up a loaded labor burden for each employee. And then as they track time, we update your labor cost based off of how much they cost us per hour times how many hours they've been at the job. Again, labor is not something we'll spend too much time on this job on this webinar on, so I'll kind of move on to subcontractors here. So this is where we're now buying from a vendor instead of materials, we're buying work. So I have someone that I've hired to work on this job. They are performing work. They're providing us with their services. Sorry, I got a question. Just want to make sure my audio is working. But they're providing us with services that are specific to this job, and I can track those vendor transactions between myself and the subcontractor specific to that job, so I can see how much it's affected my budget. When we get to equipment costs, we actually have two ways that we can manage equipment costing in Knowify. One would be internal, which we won't spend too much time on. This is the idea of I already own the equipment. I just want to see how long it was on site and how that affected my job cost. So if you have a way that you understand every hour on the site costs me X number of dollars for this equipment, you can use that for the internal use. But for the sake of this webinar, we get into external equipment, the idea of renting equipment. So again, this is all focusing on the vendor transaction. I went to the vendor, I said I need to rent this piece of machinery, whether it's an excavator, a dumpster, whatever it's going to be, and I pay them for their loaned use of their equipment. Again, this is going to be more job specific as opposed to something that I lease over the course of a year that I'll use on multiple jobs. This is more the idea of, hey, here is a piece of equipment that I rented just so I could help complete this job. And then our last cost category here that we work with is miscellaneous. And the simple explanation here is anything that doesn't fit into the above. So we have situations, and I always use the example of buying a permit. Where something can cost us money. We do have a simple transaction that's affiliated with the specific job, but I'm not buying a material. I don't want to see it as how much I'm spending on materials on the job. I'm not hiring someone, so it's not a subcontractor. It's obviously not equipment. So that's where we have the ability to have that miscellaneous category for just anything else that doesn't fit into the other categories above. Now, when we're tracking vendor costs, there's a couple different things that can affect our cost, different types of transactions. The first one that I'll quickly cover is material or inventory allocation. We won't spend too much time on this one because it's not necessarily a vendor cost in that it's something that you already own. This is the idea of I'm moving a material cost onto the job, but there's no purchase that backs it. There's no bill from a vendor. I'm not paying for these materials for the specific job. So it doesn't have that same transactional effect. It's more just good record keeping of how much we used on a job. But then we get into purchases and we get into bills. Purchases, pretty straightforward. It's something that I bought. And this could be broken down a variety of different ways. I might have bought it with cash. I may have bought it with a company credit card. It may be an order where the vendor will send me a bill afterwards. And then I might even also have my employees in the field submit a reimbursement. Here's something that I purchased, and you owe me the money, not the vendor. And it's good to be able to track all of these different types of transactions and make sure that we're tracking them correctly so that they don't all fall into that same bucket. So we have a workflow for each of these types of purchase. Then the last type we're going to discuss here is going to be our bills. The bills is going to be the concept of a vendor sending me from their end an invoice, from our end a bill, just something that says, hey, here's something that you purchased earlier. Here is now a bill. Here's how much you owe me. And these two will be connected. Purchases and bills will be connected whenever I buy something and use that vendor will invoice option in Knowify. Essentially saying, hey, I'm buying the materials now, but they're going to be sending me the bill later on. So you're, in a sense, getting them for free up front. But obviously, what's actually happening is that you are incurring a committed cost. And then later on, you will accrue the cost when they send you the bill. Um, And when in doubt, when you have something that you want to enter into the system, one way I like to clarify this, when you purchase something, you're given a receipt, whereas a bill, you are handed a bill or an invoice. So when you're trying to think, should I enter this as a purchase or as a bill, just see what you have. If it is a receipt of purchases, and then again, if it's a bill, if they send you a request for payment, then that's where we go to the bills. Now, I quickly mentioned the concept of committed costs when I talked about purchases earlier. These are the different types of costs that we're going to be working with in Knowify, mainly committed and accrued. But I'll start with committed. And this is the concept of here is a cost that I'm committing to paying in the future, but I haven't received a bill for this yet. I haven't actually paid for this yet. I'm just telling my job costing platform, hey, you can expect cost to be added to this job later on. And this is handy with situations like purchase orders, because if I buy $10,000 worth of materials via purchase order, it might even just be a phone call. I call up the vendor, they say absolutely, and they start their process of sending the materials to me. Now, technically, I haven't spent any money yet. They haven't sent me a bill yet, but I want to understand that, yes, that money is going to be spent. We already have ordered the materials, so we have committed to spending this money. And it's most commonly used again with purchase orders and then with subcontracts. So again, with the purchase order, it's I have ordered the materials, so I will be receiving the bill. And then with a subcontract, it's we've agreed upon a rate that I'll be paying you by the end of this project, even if I haven't received the bills from you and I haven't paid you yet. Now, accrued cost is going to be costs that are billed but not paid yet. So again, when we are looking at the actual transactions associated with this, if someone sends me a bill, the money is still in my bank account. I haven't actually spent anything yet, but now I have a hard document. Here's the amount that I have to pay this vendor. And that's the concept of I now want to see the accrued amount, how much I will be paying factually. It's no longer committed, but it's now accrued in that I have a formal document requesting payment. Then actual cost, which is something that we don't really track too much in Knowify, but this is the idea of now the money has left my bank account, it has left my hands, it is in the hands of the vendor. That's that last step of the process. And so through the flow, I send a purchase order, I've committed cost, they send me a bill, I've accrued cost, I send them the cash for the bill. That's the actual cost incurred. Um, And you can see this example on a phase here of some job costing in which I have a contract value that's $4,000 of committed cost. So far, they have billed me $3,200. That's my accrued cost. And I have paid 2,000 of that accrued cost, of that billed cost. That's my actual. And in this account, I'm tracking at the committed level, so I can see that the total cost of subcontractors is 4,000, even though I've only actually paid out 2,000 to date. It's just showing me that accrued cost in Knowify in real time. Now, when we talk about the different types of purchases, the two more common ones we'll see are itemized and flexible spending purchase orders. These are our committed costs. So this is the idea of I ordered materials, whether via email or over the phone or however you're ordering the materials, but I haven't actually paid for them yet and I haven't received a bill for them yet. An itemized purchase order is closed out when a bill has been logged against each item in the purchase order. So if I order 10 widgets and I log a bill for 10 widgets, now the itemized purchase order is closed. Even if the dollar figure is different, what's important is that I received a bill for every item I ordered. A flexible spending purchase order works similarly in that it's still a committed cost, but the difference is that it closes when it is fully billed in dollars, not based off of units. So instead of me ordering 10 widgets, I'll order $10,000 worth of material. That way, when I log a bill, I don't have to specify necessarily how many items I am logging this bill for. I'm logging a bill for the first $5,000 of the $10,000 flexible spending purchase order. The other types of purchases we work with are going to be our credit card expenses, cash and debit expenses, and our reimbursements. And I mentioned this briefly at the beginning here, but the idea here is that a credit card, similar type of transaction where I am purchasing something without cash necessarily changing hands. But this is where we're now saying, well, I bought this from the vendor. Technically, the credit card company paid the vendor, and now I owe the credit card company money. They'll send me a bill at the end of the month. I will make sure to pay them, and that's where the final cost is accrued. But we still track this credit card expense in real time as a cost because we do owe the credit card that company that money as soon as it's purchased. A cash and debit expense is the most straightforward thing we have. The vendor gives me materials. I give them the cash, or I can always hold a debit card. It's the same general idea. But this is the more simple transactional. I gave them money, they gave me supplies. And then the last option here, our reimbursement, is where the employee in the field buys with their own money, and now I owe the employee money instead of owing the vendor money. And we see this as an accrued cost. The way it'll work in Knowify is that when the employee enters the reimbursement, it's going to create an open bill with that employee as the vendor to say, hey, you now owe John Higgins in the field this much money for something that they purchased on behalf of you on the job site, and it's going to be used there. So I'm going to use this now. I'm going to pull up my account and show you guys a little bit more around how all of this stuff works in Knowify. And the first thing I mentioned, and I'll do this really quickly, is the concept of a material allocation. So I'm going to see if I have a good blank project. I'll use this one. I just want to make sure the cost can start at 0 just so we can see everything affect the job in real time here. So I'll start in my plan and track because this is going to be our cost tracking side of Knowify. And you can see that it shows committed 0, budget 18,000. So I told Knowify when I did that quick import, I should spend 18,000 by end of project. And then here's how much is material and here's how much is labor. And a catalog allocation can be as simple as going to a phase, clicking allocate materials, and then just writing in some material costs. So I can just say, oh, I had leftover lumber from a previous job site, and it was 12 studs at $6 a stud. I can quickly add cost that way. Now, I mentioned earlier that this isn't really a vendor cost, and especially when we don't have a inventory location. This is much simpler than having a vendor cost. But the reason I bring it up in this webinar is realistically, these studs came from somewhere, the materials came from somewhere, and it's probably from either an old job site or from my inventory. Point is, I had to buy it from a vendor at some point. So you can think of your material allocations when it comes to vendor costs as taking a vendor cost from the past and using it presently on a job. Now, the other types of costs we'll be working with will be our purchases, and I'll go into purchases a bit before I start moving into the bills. When I click Create Purchase, you can see that I could choose the different purchase types here. So I can choose vendor will send an invoice. I can create an expense where it's cash, an expense where it's a credit card, or a reimbursement. I'll start with the simple one, cash. I'll say I went to ABC Supply. I bought whatever it's going to be. Here's some wire, X amount of wire, and I submit this. Now, before I submit this, I can actually also say when I purchased this, I can set a PO number if I need. We can also include delivery and pickup details, which is a relatively new feature in Knowify that was built off of a lot of requests. So if I need to include additional information about shipping, deliver to rear, there should be a garage in the alley. We can always include that for the vendor to see this information as well. We can also request delivery dates and upload supporting documents. But I'll go and submit this. And since this is a cash expense, it goes right to QuickBooks as an expense. So it doesn't wait for the bill to come in. We don't sync purchase orders to QuickBooks, but we do sync expenses since it's now been an accrued and actually actualized cost here. And now this updates the cost of the job. So I can see the new material cost to date, and it's 2 AWG wire, and I can reference this cash PO here. What we can also do is use that same workflow, but track as a different type of cost. So I did this as materials, and I don't have a budget for other categories, but it shouldn't really matter here. So I'm going to go to my home screen into my vendors database, and I'm going to use as an example Sabino's contractors. Now, if I edit this vendor, you can see that the vendor type is set to subcontractor. This is the most important thing when it comes to tracking different types of costs, different categories in Knowify. Now we have ways that you can create a subcontract and it'll automatically figure that out and classify as a subcontractor. But if you want to use this simple workflow of creating a purchase and having it track into a specific category, this is where you can define, okay, anything I buy with this contractor goes to this type of vendor, this type of cost. So what I could do, if I go back to that job now, is do that exact same workflow. Create purchase, it's cash. Only now I'm going to choose this Sabino's contractors, and I'll say miscellaneous demo work. We paid them $1,000. I did everything exactly the same, but now I selected Sabino's contractors as my vendor here. And when I check on the updated cost of this job, it's now increased $1,000 in subcontractors instead of in materials, even though I still use that purchase workflow. Now, what we can also do for subcontractors, and I'm going to quickly update my budget to have subcontractors on one of these phases, and I'll show you why in just a moment. Open the budget, because why not? I can actually enter subcontracts for each sub, where I can say subcontractors, add sub. This was done by Sabino's. And it'll ask me for a contract value. It'll assume the budget, but I don't have to keep it as the budget. I could say they actually ended up quoting me 2,800. We could do multiple lines on a subcontract if we need. And when I submit this, it's going to create an open purchase order for that subcontractor in the system. And if I need, I can actually email that to them as well. So if it's a situation where we're actually requesting the work, this is where the purchase order comes into play. Now I'll get into this a little bit more, but I do want to just go back into some other options as far as purchase orders go, or sorry, I should say purchases. So I'll create a purchase here. And then our other option here is going to be paid with a credit card. Now you'll see that when I select this, it asks for what credit card here. If I'm connected to QuickBooks, this sets the payment account for this expense so that when this goes to QuickBooks, if it can find a matching transaction in the bank feed, it's going to know to help you reconcile and match those two transactions, the one that was entered through Knowify and the one that's automatically loaded through the bank feed. So if I come in here and I write what I purchased, and then again, we'll want to set a date. We actually bought this on the 4th. This is going to be how it now uses the reconciliation in the bank feed in QuickBooks. It's going to look at the value, and it's going to look at the date, and it's going to look at the credit card, and it's going to be able to match that. Now you can see that this expense is marked as closed. Our cash and our credit card expenses are automatically marked as closed when we initially enter them. I'm going to set up a shorter date range here so we can look at some things here. Now, closed essentially means in Knowify that we no longer have any more interaction needed between us and the vendor. So if I purchase something with cash, I'm no longer waiting for the vendor to send me a bill or a receipt or anything. All of that's done at that moment. So if I look at these ones I've created today, the material allocation already done interacting with the vendor. The cash purchase done. The credit one already done. The difference here is just that again, we're no longer expecting them to send us a bill or anything like that. We may still need to complete some of the work, but closed and Knowify basically means at this point, we're no longer expecting them to follow up with us to get paid or anything along those lines. But I can see that my subcontractor that I entered, which automatically sets up as a flexible spending purchase order, is still showing as active. Now, purchase orders will remain open until the amount has been fully billed, until Sabino has sent me the total amount of the contract in a variety of bills. This will remain open to show me, hey, there's still money that is owed to Sabino that we will be billed for with time. Now, I'm going to create one more purchase order really quick because I want to go through the difference between an itemized versus a flexible spending purchase order. And I could choose, you can see purchase order, vendor will send an invoice, means itemized. I'll choose that same vendor again. I'm going to put a couple different items in here. And I just want some quantities involved. Perfect. Let's go a little smaller for no real reason in particular. Now, when I create this purchase order, it updates my committed cost to date on the job. So I can see it's still active. We still expect a bill. There's still transactions. There's still life between us and ABC Supply on PO 41. And I can see the updated cost to date as we go through all of this. And it can be broken down at the phase level as well. Now, when I receive a bill from ABC Supply, I can do this a couple different ways. One option would be I could say add new bill from ABC Supply. And I know if I will remember everything that I submitted as a purchase order, and it's going to reference them here. So if ABC Supply sends me one bill at the end of the month for everything that I've purchased so far, I can go through here and say, perfect, here are the things that they have billed me for so far. And I could submit that bill. I can also manually add items here too. So if there's something that wasn't on the bill that we ever received, sorry, it wasn't in my purchase orders in Knowify, but I did have it on the bill. I could say they also sent me some paint, a bill for some paint from my finish phase, and we could submit this as well. Now we can see that this is a bill with ABC Supply. It has the total amount. The invoice and due date could be set as well. And this is going to sync to QuickBooks for us. Now, quickly just to go reference the concept of a bill against a PO again. I have PO number 41. From here, if I receive a bill, I can actually come into this menu and say create bill for PO. That way, if they're going to be sending me individual bills for each PO I submit, we could speed up the process and have Knowify filter everything out for me. Now, the purchase order, PO 41, is still open, and it will be until I've been billed for 45 units of wire, 334 units of pipe, 45 disconnect switches. And what I could do is say, well, they've actually only billed me for 20 of the feet of wire. They've only billed me for 300 of the lengths of pipe. And let's just say all of the disconnect switches because it doesn't really matter here. When I submit this, it's going to know to take those out of the balance of the PO, which I can see is still active. And I'll be able to still log bills against this. So if I go to this purchase order again and say create bill for PO again, now I have the outstanding balance of these items that's open on the purchase order instead of the uh, uh, initial amount that was submitted when we created the purchase order itself. And I'll also use this as a quick moment before I finish closing out that bill, just to show you how we can track as accrued in Knowify instead of committed if we need. So if I go to my customized section under cost management, you see where it says use actual cost instead of committed cost. It technically should say accrued, but it's basically saying wait until we receive a bill before you consider something as a cost. This is also where we enable flexible POs that aren't done through purchase orders, through subcontracts. I can show you this in a second as well. But the idea here, now that I've checked that, it's going to update my cost. So it's no longer considering purchase orders as part of cost, but only the things that I've logged as bills so far. So even though I have a subcontract in the system for $2,800, it doesn't recognize that as cost because I haven't received any bills for this yet. However, when I receive bills, again, I can now look into the concept of a flexible spending purchase order a little bit more. I can go to Sabina's contractors. PO 39 is my contract with them. I can say add subcontractor bill. And instead of me logging its units, the quantity can always be one. They're billing me for, let's just say, $1,400 worth of work. Now, instead of this being outstanding in units of work, it's outstanding in $1,400. So if I look at this PO again, I'll be able to see there's a balance of $1,400 on it. It was originally for $2,800. Now the balance is $1,400. That's 50% of it. And the same general workflow here, if I log a bill against this PO, it's going to remember that outstanding balance. So I could say, okay, now they've billed me for the rest. Now this will close the PO. You see 39 is closed. If I need, I can always reference this. I can click that link, see this again here. But now that I have bills against it, the bills will be closed based off of payment. So I have the purchase order, which is closed when I log enough bills against it. But the bills, this is outstanding in the amount of $1,400. I could say record that we've paid Sabino's contractors, and that will close the bill side of these things. So again, if I want to look at this, I could see for Sabino's contractors, I could say for subcontractors, we budgeted 3,000. They send a contract for 2,800. They've billed 2,800, but we've only paid them 1,400 to date. And that's the different tiers of costing that we can see through these different types of transactions in Knowify. Another thing that's worth mentioning is the concept of bill and purchase order precedence. So let's say I do track my cost at the committed level. What'll happen pretty often is that the amount that I receive in the bill doesn't match perfectly what I had planned on when I created the purchase order. So I created purchase order 41, and I said $45 per unit, or sorry, $1 per unit on wire, $7 per unit on this pipe. When I log this bill, they may have sent a bill that says actually it ended up being $8 per piece of pipe, and it ended up being $1.50. That's okay. We want to actually adjust that here when we're entering that bill. Because in a sense, the purchase order that we sent was really just a way for us to track that committed cost as a temporary measure. Here's the placeholder cost until we have the factual accrued cost from the vendor. When I submit this now, it's going to use the $1.50 and the $8 precedents for this bill to update the cost of the job. So it's no longer looking at that purchase order price. It's actually looking at the actual amount that I was billed for each of these items. So yes, when I received the first bill, those 300 units ended up costing me 2,100 like we planned. But on the second bill, here's the updated cost per unit for our pipe, for our wire, and that's going to be what ends up uh, finalizing the cost of the job. So as I run reports on this job and I see how much I've spent, that bill takes precedence over the purchase order, which obviously takes precedence over the budget because that's always just a projection. Um, and so these are just different ways that we can track cost. We can have different types of purchase order or purchase that we submit. We can log bills against the purchase orders. And again, we can always log a bill that's not against the purchase order at all. So if I got a bill from who's someone that might not have an outstanding one, Harry, I could say, okay, manually add a bill. So if we have a workflow where we actually don't send purchase orders and we just want to skip that step, that's always okay. You can always go directly bill into job and Knowify, and that will always cost accordingly and update QuickBooks accordingly. Now, just to look into some of the other types of costing here, I mentioned the concept of equipment and miscellaneous. So let's say I have a purchase order or an agreement from a equipment supplier. I'm going to say add a new purchase. And here's where I can see now that I have this enabled, I have the option to select flexible spending as well. And I could say from the equipment rental sub, and I could say we had to rent a dumpster for, let's say we have an open purchase order with them for up to $5,000 worth of bills. And I believe my PO number here was 146. Again, this all works the same way in that we're actually just going to be able to log any number of bills against this purchase order up until the total amount billed is $5,000 or more. So I have my open purchase order. I can email it, all of that good stuff, and I can create a bill for PO and say they just sent me a bill for the first $2,000, and it adjusts the balance of that PO. So now I can see that it's outstanding in $3,000 instead of the full $5,000 we started with. And then Knowify recognizes that this is actually an equipment cost. So I could see equipment, $2,000 spent, and I never budgeted. So that's why it's there. And this is where we see the separation of internal versus external equipment. Since this is a transaction with a vendor, since I rented this from the company that I called equipment rental, it's going to update the cost accordingly. The same general thing goes for our miscellaneous. I'll go back to just a cash expense just to kind of speed this up. But I can see I have a miscellaneous vendor here where I could say I had to buy a permit for $100. We'll use the same project. And now I'll be able to see the updated miscellaneous costs on the job as well, as opposed to everything automatically going to material or labor. And I could see my costs broken down into these categories. And again, just to show you how all of this is categorized, if I go back to my settings to my home screen, to my vendors, I can look at miscellaneous and see you are coded to miscellaneous expenses. I can look at my equipment rental and see that you are coded to equipment supplier. And that's how we're going to end up tracking all of this cost through the system. Trying to think what else we have here. I always recommend for people who need more categories, because that's a pretty common request. People want things that aren't necessarily shown in our base level of categories. This is where having more phases comes in handy and using that miscellanea comes in handy. So you can always use miscellaneous and say, let's say I need a special category for something like tools. I could come in here and say add a job phase for tools instead of miscellaneous budget. And now I have the ability to track my cost of tools by using a miscellaneous budget on a tools phase. And so you get a little bit more power that way as well. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to just quickly cover is the process of reimbursement, because that's always a common question here as well. So our last type of purchase we have is where I can have this submit either to myself by default. So when I create a reimbursement, it knows to reimburse me. But we can also submit reimbursements on behalf of other employees. And I could say that I bought fuel for, let's just put that in here. And I can submit this. Now, what this does, instead of syncing this as an expense to whichever vendor I ended up buying the fuel from, it creates an open bill automatically where I, the employee, am the vendor. So if I look at this, the reimbursement is outstanding. When I've paid this employee, that will close both the bill for the reimbursement as well as the purchase order that was created. So if I go down to finish where we created this, I could see fuel via vendor bill, and here's the closed out transaction. That's everything that I wanted to cover for the sake of this webinar. We have some time left, and so I'd like to start looking into some of the Q&A here. So let's see what we have that came in first. There's a question about demonstrating adding an expense for a credit card payment. So if it's actually paying the credit card itself, that's something you'll probably want to manage inside your QuickBooks account. Like you'll actually pay the credit card with their website, with their billing system. But adding the expense that you purchased with the credit card is when I could say expense paid with credit card, choose the credit card, choose the vendor, and then this is going to sync to QuickBooks for reconciliation. There's a question about adding retainage to subcontractor invoices. We don't have that quite yet, but you do have the option of always just logging the bills less the retention. So let's say I have a new subcontract here, Archie's, and they quoted me $10,000. And if there's going to be 10% retainage on everything, what I could do is if they send me a $100 progress invoice, I could add a bill for $900 because I'm just doing less the 10% retention on that project. So they send me a bill for 1,000. I might have said 100 earlier, but they send me a bill for 1,000. I log the bill for 900, so it still shows the outstanding amount. That way, when everything is said and done, everything's been fully billed. The outstanding amount of the contract that could be logged in the bill is the amount that is being held in retention. And so we have the ability to track that. Is there a report showing the difference between POs versus actual bills? That's a good question. So one thing that you can do in your purchases, if we view our purchases report, pull this back down, sorry. Maybe I'm mixing up my reports here. Could have sworn we have something that actually shows the amount billed to date. Well, either way, if you export this, you'll be able to see the amount outstanding versus the total. And so you can look at your different purchase orders and see how much was originally on the purchase order, how much outstanding now. So you can see which things need to still require bills with time. Someone asked about adding a change order in the contract and how it should update the budget. I'll do a really quick rundown of this just because it's a neat feature that we have. But if you want more information on this, definitely connect with our team on it. Technically, adding a change order shouldn't adjust the budget automatically since even though you'll be charging more, you might not necessarily want to change how much you originally planned on spending. But if you do want to track this separately, I can create a change order for uh, upgraded. Here, actually, I use that can light installation as my example. I could say for a change order, we need to install 50 more can lights. And I did this because it gives us a nice breakdown or bill of materials here. Um, Once this is active, it depends on our job costing style, but in my professional, I can use this gear and say create phase and plan automatically and have Knowify automatically generate a new phase for me with a budget based off of what I entered there. So you can track those separately from uh, the rest of the cost and budget. Um, there's a question about losing assignment detail when entering um, uh, and to Knowify and syncing to QuickBooks. I'd recommend connecting with our support team on that. There shouldn't be any reason this happens. If the category from Knowify is what you're referencing, because they mentioned the category getting dropped, then that's something that doesn't actually sync. It's based off of the classification of how you categorized your vendors here, and then the individual items. We do a whole webinar on QuickBooks mapping as well. I recommend checking out the site or wait until the next one comes around. Um, Can you change a purchase order to a credit card expense? So that's a good question. I believe we do allow you to do that. So if I have a purchase order, this is a reimbursement, it's a bad example. Here's a purchase order. I can say edit and then mark it as a credit card expense instead, select the credit card, and then we can submit it and sync it accordingly. So you do have that option if you need. Um, and the last one just said, great question. I think that's all we have for questions today. Again, what we covered here is all relatively straightforward in that it's kind of just the basics of job costing when it comes to Knowify, and you'll see that a lot of it has similarities to what you would be doing in QuickBooks if you're using QuickBooks on its own. But if you have more questions about this, and if you want to set up a training session, I always recommend connecting with your success manager or whoever's coaching your account. So if you have any questions like, hey, we always get these documents from our vendors, how would I submit them? Or what's the best workflow when we purchase this material and this is how we manage the bills. That type of stuff is always good to talk through. So never be shy about reaching out to our support team or your success manager for more training and some more Q&A on all of that. But I appreciate everyone joining in again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Take care, everyone.